Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Zeke-ollege football. It's episode 9, which is really unbelievable that I've already been doing this for 9 episodes. It feels like I've just started. But I am excited to bring the final conference preview here for you today. We are going to be talking about the conference that just means more. It is SEC day, and I could not be more excited. So, you know, SEC is my favorite conference. It is the home to my favorite team, the Missouri Tigers. And really, when people think of college football, more often than not, they think of the SEC. Big teams like Alabama, Florida, Georgia, LSU, and Tennessee. And then they added two huge brands as well, Oklahoma and Texas coming over from the Big 12. So it should be a really interesting conference coming up this year, and I am excited to bring you my preview. So, without further ado, let's get started. Let's start up at the top. Let's talk about Alabama, right? Biggest story of the offseason was Nick Saban deciding to retire. That created a domino effect. Saban retires. Alabama brings in Kalen DeBoer from Washington. Washington then goes and hires Jed Fish from Arizona. Arizona then hires Brent Brennan from San Jose State. They go and get Ken Niumatalolo. It created a huge, push uh, in the coaching market. A lot of transfers happened because of this. There's a lot that's going on. But it, at the end of the day, with a huge program like Alabama, anything that happens is going to get tens of thousands of hours worth of media coverage. It just is. So it's going to be year one for Kalen DeBoer. They went 12-2 last year, lost in the Rose Bowl to Michigan, ended their college football playoff hopes. But Jalen Milroe will be back at quarterback. He really solidified himself as a better passer towards the latter half of the season. Now, a lot of portal additions, most of them coming via way of Washington. That's not surprising to me. When you have a head coach move from one spot to another, they're going to bring a lot of their guys. Now, Saban's retirement did lead some Alabama players to leave, most notably Caleb Downs, one of their star corners, left for Ohio State, and then Isaiah Bond left to go play for Texas. So, some big time names leaving the portal. Whenever there's anything about Alabama, it's going to be a big time story. But, a lot of their talented players deciding to leave. Ja'Cory Brooks went to Louisville. Uh, there's just a bunch of good players that left Alabama, but not surprisingly, plenty of good players coming to Alabama as well. So, I wouldn't expect Alabama to be awful next year. They're still going to be a good team. They might not be Saban era good though, so just be wary about that. Now, Arkansas. Arkansas had a very disappointing year last year, 4-8. And they did return a lot of players last year from a team that was honestly pretty good in 2022 and 2021 as well. KJ Jefferson now transfers out. So Rocket Sanders from the backfield also transfers out. And then they're going to replace them with Talon Green and Jaquindon Jackson. Green transferred in from Boise State. Relatively big name in the group of five ranks. He is a dual threat, but you want to see him make a little bit better decisions in the passing game. He tends to have some overthrows, some accuracy issues. And, well, Jaquindon Jackson, good player out of Utah. So it's going to be interesting for Arkansas. It's kind of a make or break year here for Sam Pittman. Arkansas hoping to not fall back to being the bottom of the SEC yet again, but only time will tell. Now, moving on to Auburn. It's year 2 for Hugh Freeze over there. They went 6-7 last year, almost pulled off a big upset victory over Alabama in the Iron Bowl. That was sort of sullied by a 4th and 31 play to Isaiah Bond, but Bond's not going to be at Alabama anymore. So I guess we'll see for next season. Peyton Thorne, most likely the starting quarterback yet again. He didn't do much to impress me, to be honest, but Auburn has some talented players to surround him with. Bringing in Keandre Lambert-Smith from Penn State, and then Sam Jackson, the 5th. He played quarterback over at Cal, but they're switching him over to wide receiver from what I've heard. And I guess their biggest loss in the portal, they didn't lose that many players, but their biggest loss would be wide receiver Jay Fair, who transferred over to USC. Now, Florida. It's going to be year 3 for Billy Napier. They're 5-7 last year, so they missed the postseason, didn't make a bowl game. Graham Mertz back at quarterback. He was injured during the Missouri game, but he will be back. And then they also picked up a couple good players in the recruiting ranks. DJ Legway at quarterback, and then LJ McCray, a defensive end. Could make some big impacts as freshmen, but their biggest portal losses, they sting a little bit. Trevor Etienne, their leading rusher last year, transfers over to Georgia. And then Princely Umanmielen, Princely Umanmielen transferred over to Ole Miss. Next, let's talk about Georgia. I mean, what really is there to say that hasn't already been said about Georgia? It's year 9 for Kirby Smart. They were 13-1 last year. The sole loss coming to Alabama in that SEC title game. They felt like they were slighted. They lose by 3, their only loss of the year. They miss out on the 14 playoff. And they destroy Florida State in bowl game 63-3. They're upset. Now, rightfully so, but that's last year. This year we're gonna have a 12-team playoff. Expect Georgia to be hungry. They've won 2 out of the last 3 national titles. They didn't have a chance to play for one last year. So Carson Beck will be back at quarterback. Bit of a game manager, but he does a good job. Trevor Etienne, as I previously mentioned, coming over from Florida, he'll slot into the RB1 role. Their biggest loss is on the defensive side. Marvin Jones Jr. Transfers over to Florida State, where his father played. But every sign is telling me that Georgia is going to be pretty darn good again. And that's not surprising me. They put a lot of faith in Kirby Smart. Just gave him a 10-year deal. He's making $13 million a year. So if that's not any indication that they have a lot of trust, then I don't know what is. All right, let's talk about Kentucky. It's year 12. For Mark Stoops, they were 7-6 last year. A lot of their production is gone from last year, then. Devin Leary went to the draft. Ray Davis went to the draft. They brought over Georgia transfer Brock Vandergriff at quarterback. We'll see how he plays. He's had some time to develop on the bench, but we're just going to have to wait and see how Vandergriff does. Uh, you know, also addressing some offensive concerns, Chip Trainum coming over from Ohio State to play running back, and Jamoy Macklin from North Texas to play wide receiver. Macklin related to Jeremy Macklin, so they beat out Missouri to get him. Now, I would say running back is still a concern, though, because a lot of the offensive production last year was Ray Davis. They really leaned heavily on him, and for the most part, Chip Trainum has been a change of pace back, opposite Travion Henderson. So, it's going to be one of those things where we have to see, can Trainum really fill into that running back one role, or is he really just more of a power change of pace back? So that really depends, and I guess we'll have to wait and see. Let's talk about LSU. LSU, another team that lost a bunch of production to the draft. Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas. Those three went in the first round. And, when you lose a Heisman winner, it's going to be tough to rebound. It's year 3 for Brian Kelly, though, 10-3 last year. Garrett Nussmeier finally going to get his time to play quarterback for the Bayou Bengals. Their biggest gains in the portal, A.J. Swan, most likely going to fill a backup role. He's coming over from Vanderbilt. And then C.J. Daniels from Liberty and Xavier Thomas from Mississippi State coming over to play wide receiver. Now, their biggest loss comes in the run game. Logan Diggs, their starting running back last year, transfers over to Ole Miss. Speaking of a Mississippi school, Mississippi State. It's going to be year 1 for Jeff Lebby. The Zach Arnett era did not work out. He was a quick hire. They had to do something after the unfortunate passing of Mike Leach. But it was a 5-7 year last year. And, their biggest losses were, 2 members of their backfield. Will Rogers, their starting quarterback for the past couple of years, SEC's leading passer of all time, and then Jaquavius Marks. He also is, you might know him as Woody Marks. He's also left for the portal. Now, they're bringing in a couple different players as well. Kelly Akari from UTEP, Kevin Coleman from Louisville, and then Blake Shapen from Baylor to play quarterback for them. I'll be honest, it is not going to be easy for Mississippi State. There's a lot of production that left there. I like some of the pieces that they're adding in, but it's tough sledding. I don't think Blake Shapen's really going to, push the needle all that much. I'm not very high on Mississippi State. Now let's talk about Oklahoma. So it's year 3 for Brett Venables. They were 10-3 last year. Jackson Arnold will be the starting quarterback. Now, Oklahoma completely had to restructure their offensive line throughout the portal. There's only one returning starter from last year. Their biggest losses were Dylan Gabriel going to Oregon, and then Caden Green, who was a true freshman tackle. He's gone over to Mizzou. And the biggest question is, how will they fare in year one in the SEC? Certainly, people would like to say that's a step up. It's a jump in competition. So, how will they do? Now for Ole Miss. Good season last year for Lane Kiffin. Is year 5 for him now. They were 12-2 last year. Returning a lot. Jackson Dart at quarterback again. Now, they did lose one of their better players, Quinshon Judkins, left for Ohio State. But they brought in plenty of players in the portal. They had the number 1 portal class in the country. Players like Princely Umanmielen from Florida, Walter Nolan from Texas A&M, and those are both on the defensive line. Logan Diggs and Henry Parrish to replace Judkins. I would expect Ole Miss to be pretty solid again next year. They have a lot of talent on their team. They do. Now, South Carolina. Year 4 for Shane Beamer. They were 5-7 last year. They had a tough start to the season, sort of rebounded towards the end. Their biggest addition in the portal, Rocket Sanders coming over from Arkansas. And then a couple of quarterbacks that they brought in as well. They brought in Davis Bevel from Oklahoma, Robbie Ashford from Auburn. But their starter is going to be Lenora Sellers. He came in relief of Spencer Rattler a little bit last season and really played well. So South Carolina is one of those teams where I think they are going to be better than they were last year, but I don't know by how much. Let's move on to Tennessee. Tennessee, year 4 for Josh Heupel. They were 9-4 last year. Their biggest losses were Squirrel Wright and Joe Milton, who both went to the NFL draft. Their biggest portal additions, probably Jermod McCoy, who was a cornerback from Oregon State. They had the 13th best recruiting class in 2024, so they did have young talent influx, but I don't know how much impact that talent will be able to make, instantly. So, looking at their schedule, it should be reasonable. I think they can get to a solid win total. But the real question is, how ready is Nico Iamaleava? I'm still gonna have to work on Nico's name a little bit more as we get closer to the season, because I feel like I'm gonna be saying it a lot more. But Nico Iamaleava, gonna be the starting quarterback. He played in the bowl game, looked pretty good, but we'll see how he develops. Let's talk about Texas. Year 4 for Steve Sarkisian. They were 12-2 last year. Lost in the Sugar Bowl to Washington. Quinn Ewers is back at quarterback. They did lose a lot in the draft, including a good portion of their wide receiver core, but they did sort of refill that core through the portal. So Isaiah Bond, like I earlier mentioned, coming over from Alabama, Silas Bolden coming over from Oregon State, and then Amari Niblack from Alabama also joining Texas. He's a tight end, though, so adding a little bit more size as well. Biggest loss, probably some of the defensive backs transferred out a little bit. Jacob Catalon is one of those names, one of the more familiar names that I saw transferring out. And then same question for Texas, like Oklahoma. How will they fare in their first year in the SEC? I think Texas is built for the SEC a little bit better right now than Oklahoma is. I would expect them to have a little bit better of a year. Let's move on to another Texas team, Texas A&M. It's year one for Mike Elko. It was they went 7-6 last year. Connor Weigman at quarterback. And then they added some people in the portal. E.J. Smith, son of Emmett Smith, and then Nick Scorton, a defensive end from Purdue. But they did lose some players as well. Evan Stewart, one of their better wide receivers, transferred to Oregon. And then Walter Nolan, a good defensive lineman that they had left for Ole Miss. And then Vanderbilt, year four for Clark Lee, 2-10 last year. They still haven't officially named a starting quarterback yet. It's either going to be Nate Johnson from Utah or Diego Pavia from New Mexico State. And both of those players are probably their biggest portal additions. A lot of losses in the wide receiver room. Their top three wide receivers from last season transferred out, and they didn't really bring anyone else in as well. Now I finally get a chance on this show to talk about my favorite team, the Missouri Tigers. It's year five for Elia Drinkowitz. They were 12-2 last year with a Cotton Bowl victory over Ohio State. Brady Cook is back at quarterback, and the Tigers also return arguably the best wide receiver room in the nation. Luther Burden III has been a revelation. Theo Weiss is back. Speedy Johnson is back. Cody Schrader left for the draft. He got signed by, I believe, the San Francisco 49ers. But they brought in two transfer running backs to replace him, Marcus Carroll from Georgia State and Nate Noel from App State as well. A lot of defensive players got drafted as well. A couple players in the secondary. And their defensive coordinator left for LSU, so Blake Baker's no longer there. They brought in Corey Batoon from South Alabama. But they did bring in some defensive transfers as well. So Toriano Pride from Clemson, Darius Smith on the D-line from Georgia, and then a linebacker in Jeremiah Beasley from Michigan. And then a couple offensive linemen as well, Caden Green from Oklahoma, and then Marcus Bryant from SMU. So I have high hopes for Mizzou this season. Pretty advantageous schedule, but that will conclude the preview section of this. Let's get into the predictions. And let's start off with who I think will have the best record. I think it'll be Georgia. I don't see them losing a game on this schedule. I think they match up well against all of these teams. Their biggest tests will be at Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss, and then Clemson in a neutral siter to start off the season. But I see them having the slight edge over all of these teams. So I see them going 12-0 and 8-0 in conference play. Now, I have a couple teams going 11-1 as well. Texas, I have their sole loss being to Georgia. Ole Miss, 11-1, 7-1 in conference, also losing to Georgia. And then I have Mizzou going 11-1 as well, sole loss on the road at Alabama. Now, for teams that are 10-2, I see Alabama losing to Georgia and then losing at Tennessee. So going 10-2, 6-2 in conference play. Uh, Next best record is going to be LSU, going 9-3, losing to Ole Miss at home, Texas A&M on the road, and Alabama at home. I see Tennessee also going 9-3, losing at Oklahoma, losing at home to Kentucky, and then losing at Georgia. Texas A&M, I see going 8-4, with losses to Notre Dame, Missouri, at South Carolina, and Texas. For 7-win teams, I see Oklahoma with 7-5 record, 3-5 in conference, including losing to Texas, on the road at Ole Miss, at Missouri, Alabama at home, and then at LSU. I also see Auburn going 7-5. Losses at against Oklahoma, at Georgia, at Missouri, versus Texas A&M, and then at Alabama to end the season. And then to round out the teams that are still bowl eligible, Kentucky I see going 6-6, with wins coming against Southern Miss, Ohio, Vanderbilt, at Tennessee, Murray State, and Louisville, but losing at Texas, at Florida, against Auburn, at Ole Miss, against Georgia, and South Carolina. I see South Carolina also going 6-6. Losses against LSU, Ole Miss, at Alabama, at Oklahoma, Missouri, and then at Clemson to end the season. And now let's get to the teams that will miss the bowl games. Florida. I see them going 5-7, 2-6 in conference, losing to Texas A&M, Tennessee, Georgia, at Texas, against LSU, Ole Miss, and at Florida State. Just a murderous row of a schedule there. Final 5 weeks of the season are really difficult. I see Arkansas going 4-8. So I see them dropping games at Missouri, against Texas, Ole Miss, LSU, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and then at Auburn and at Oklahoma State. And then couple 3-win teams. Mississippi State, I see them losing at Arizona State, against Florida, at Texas, at Georgia, Texas A&M, Arkansas, at Tennessee, against Missouri, and at Ole Miss. And then I see Vanderbilt going 3-9 as well, losing to Virginia Tech, at Missouri, Alabama, at Kentucky, Texas, at Auburn, South Carolina, at LSU, and against Tennessee, with their 3 wins coming against Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State. So that is the SEC preview. I know I went kind of rapid fire through it, but really, I'm excited. SEC is one of those conferences where it's hard to predict. There's going to be good teams throughout. Last year was a bit of a down year in the SEC. I don't think you can say the same. You have a lot of returning quarterback starters that have already held the position for at least a season. Connor Weigman, Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, Brady Cook, Carson Beck, Graham Mertz, Peyton Thorne, Jalen Milroe. A lot of these players have already been there, been in the SEC, have been seasoned by that schedule, and can now sort of show what they're made of and really improve and push the conference to new heights. Again, it's a 12-team playoff now. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a good chunk of the representation coming from the SEC. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Go ahead and let me know in the comment section below if you agree with my picks, if you disagree with my picks, if you like the episode, dislike the episode, what have you. Also, feel free to drop a follow over at Zeke-ollege on Instagram. That is Zeke.ollegefootball over on Instagram. And with that, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all at some point in the future.